sun hung low over the vast, cracked earth, casting long, golden streaks across a desolate village in the heart of West Africa. The once thriving town of Okonbi had been known for its fertile farmlands and the laughter of children, chasing each other along the dirt paths. But those days were now whispers in the wind, buried beneath years of drought, disease, and hunger. In the heart of this struggling community was Tund, a man whose hands had once tilled the land with pride, coaxing yam and maize from the earth like an artist drawing life onto canvas. Now, his fingers were cracked and blistered from days of searching for water, for food, for anything to keep his family alive. His wife, Amina, sat outside their crumbling hut, rocking their youngest daughter, Said, in her arms. The little girl's belly was swollen, not from nourishment but from hunger, her tiny ribs pressing against her thin skin. Each night, Said cried softly into her mother's chest, too weak to wail, too exhausted to fight the hunger gnawing at her insides. Tund sighed heavily, his eyes scanning the horizon, where the sun was slowly sinking behind the skeletal remains of what used to be a forest. He had been walking for hours, his feet covered in dust, his throat parched like the dying riverbeds. He had found nothing, no water, no food, no work. The market in the neighboring village had been just as barren as Okonbi. The stalls once brimming with cassava, ground nuts, and dried fish now reduced to empty wooden frames covered in dust and desperation. His eldest son, Gehind, barely 15, approached him with a hesitant step. "Baba, what did you find?" Gehind asked, though he already knew the answer. Tund shook his head slowly, dropping the empty sack from his shoulders. "Nothing," he muttered, his voice hoarse from thirst. Amina, who had been watching them from the doorway of their hut, bit her lip and held Said closer to her chest. She knew this moment too well, the moment when hope faltered, when despair became a heavy weight pressing down on all of them. Tund looked at his wife, the love of his life, the woman who had once laughed with the joy of a full harvest, who had danced under the moonlight when the village celebrated the rains. Now, her face was hollow, her cheeks sunken, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "We cannot keep waiting for a miracle," Amina said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The elders say the drought will not end soon. If we stay, we will die." Tund clenched his fists. "Where will we go?" "Anywhere," she said, determination flickering in her tired eyes. "Anywhere there is water, anywhere we can start again." Gehind, who had been silent, finally spoke. "I heard from some of the young men in the village. They are leaving. They say there is work in the city. In Aremo, maybe we can." No, Tund's voice was sharp. He had seen what the city did to men like him. He had seen them return, broken, or worse, never return at all. But what choice did they have? Night fell upon Okonbi, bringing with it the chilling wind that carried the scent of dust and death. The village, once filled with voices and music, now echoed with silence. Tund lay awake, staring at the roof of their hut, listening to Amina's soft breaths beside him. Said whimpered in her sleep, while Gehind and his younger brother, Rotimi, huddled in the corner. Tomorrow, they would have to decide. Would they stay and starve, or would they leave and risk everything? The answer would change their lives forever. Tund barely slept that night. The weight of the decision pressed against his chest like a millstone. The village of Okonbi was more than his home, it was his past, his ancestors' land, the soil that had cradled him since birth. To leave would be to abandon everything he had ever known. Yet, to stay was to watch his family wither away before his eyes. As the first streaks of dawn painted the sky, he rose quietly, stepping outside to breathe the cool morning air. The village was silent. The hunger had stolen even the strength to greet the new day. Amina joined him, wrapping a thin shawl around her shoulders. Her eyes met his in the dim light. "You've made up your mind," she said softly. Tund exhaled deeply. "We will go." Amina nodded. "We must leave before the sun is high." By the time the first rays of sunlight peeked over the dry landscape, Tund's family had packed what little they had: a few old clothes, a handful of dried cassava, a small gourd of water. The weight of survival was light in their hands, but heavy in their hearts. Gehind and Rotimi helped their mother tie a bundle on her back. where little Said clung weakly. The toddler's body was feverish, her tiny fingers grasping at the cloth tied around her mother's waist. Tun looked around their small hut one last time. The wooden walls bore the scars of years of struggle, the cracks in the mud, the broken thatch roof patched with scraps of old fabric. He sighed and stepped forward. As they made their way through the village, they saw others preparing to leave as well. The drought had broken more than just the earth. It had shattered the will of Okan. Tun led his family away from Okanbi, their feet dragging through the dusty paths they had walked their entire lives. The sun, still young in the sky, already bore down on them, baking the cracked earth beneath their sandals. Other families moved in the same direction, some carrying baskets filled with what little food remained, others with infants strapped to their backs, their tiny cries lost in the wind. The village of Okanbi was emptying, its people scattering like dry leaves in search of water, of hope, of life. Amina tightened her grip on Said, whose fever had worsened overnight. The child whimpered against her mother's chest, her frail body barely clinging to wakefulness. Kihind walked beside them, his eyes scanning the horizon, while Rotimi lagged behind, struggling to keep pace with his short legs. They walked for hours. The trees, once full and green, were now skeletal frames, their branches clawing at the sky. The rivers that had once brought joy to the village, where children splashed and women laughed as they washed clothes, were now nothing more than deep scars in the earth. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became unbearable. Tun stopped and turned to his family. "We must rest." They found a small patch of shade beneath a dying tree, though it offered little relief. Amina unwrapped Said from her back and laid her down gently. The little girl's lips were cracked, her breath shallow. Kihind reached for the gourd of water, but Tun shook his head. "We must save it." "But Said..." Tun hesitated, then sighed. "Just a sip." Amina took the gourd and carefully tilted a few drops into the child's mouth. Said stirred but did not wake. Rotimi sat beside his mother, his stomach rumbling loudly. "Mama, when will we eat?" Amina pulled him close. "Soon, my son, soon." Tun looked ahead, shielding his eyes against the sun. They had heard of a town, a Ramo, far beyond the hills. People said there was work there, and sometimes food, but no one knew for certain. His legs ached, his back screamed in protest, but he forced himself to his feet. "We must keep going." The journey stretched endlessly before them. Each step was heavier than the last, each breath drier. As they walked, the world around them blurred in the heat. The road was lined with the remains of those who had walked this path. Before them, abandoned huts, discarded pots, footprints fading into the dust. Then, as the sun began to dip, they saw it. Smoke, rising in thin wisps in the distance. Amina clutched Tun's arm. "A village?" Tun's heart pounded. "Or something worse." Kihind's voice was eager. "We should go." Tun hesitated. The land was harsh, and men desperate. Not all villages welcomed strangers, especially those with empty hands. But Said's weak breaths reminded him of why they had left. With a silent prayer, he nodded. They would go. They had no choice. The rising smoke curled against the sky like a silent call, both hopeful and ominous. Tun led his family forward, each step carrying the weight of uncertainty. Amina clutched Said closer, while Kihind and Rotimi stayed close behind. Their legs ached, their lips cracked from thirst, but the possibility of food, water, or shelter pushed them forward. As they neared the village, the sounds of distant voices and the rhythmic pounding of pestles against mortars grew clearer. This was no abandoned settlement. People lived here. The entrance to the village was marked by wooden stakes, their tops charred black. The air smelled of smoke and roasted maize. Tun saw figures moving beyond the entrance, carrying sacks, stirring pots, tending to livestock, things he had not seen in Okanbi for years. A group of men stood near the entrance, their faces hard, their eyes scanning the strangers approaching. They were lean, their skin darkened by the sun, their expressions unreadable. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped forward. His head was wrapped in a faded blue scarf, and a cut ran along his left cheek. An old wound healed badly. "Who are you?" the man demanded, his voice firm but not unkind. Tun swallowed, his throat dry. "We are travelers from Okanbi. We seek shelter, work if there is any." The man's eyes swept over them, lingering on Said's limp form in Amina's arms. His face softened slightly. "This is Ojidi," he said. "It is not a place for the weak." Amina's voice was barely above a whisper. "Please, our child is sick." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then, the man turned and gestured toward the village. "Follow me." They entered cautiously. The village was alive, women carrying water from a small well, children with bony frames running barefoot, traders shouting over baskets of dried fish and beans. The sight of food, however little, made Rotimi's stomach growl audibly. The man led them to a hut near the edge of the village. "You may rest here tonight," he said. "In the morning, we will see what you can offer in return." Tund bowed his head. "Thank you." Amina laid Said on the cool earth inside the hut, brushing damp strands of hair from the child's forehead. She was burning with fever. Tund knew that if they did not find help soon, they would lose her. That night, they listened to the sounds of Ojidi laughter, arguments, the distant cries of babies. It was different from Okanbi, but hunger still lurked in the air. This was not salvation, only a temporary pause from their suffering. As Tund lay awake, staring at the hut's roof, he knew their struggle was far from over. Tomorrow, he would have to prove his worth, or they would be forced to leave once again. Tund rose before dawn, the ache in his limbs reminding him of the endless miles they had traveled. Ojidi was a village of survivors, hardened by the same struggles that had driven his own people from Okanbi. If they were to stay, he would have to prove his usefulness. He stepped outside the hut, inhaling the scent of damp earth. The village was already stirring, women lighting fires, young boys carrying baskets of millet. Elders gathered in hushed conversations. The man from the previous night, Bako, approached, his expression unreadable. "You slept well?" he asked gruffly. Tund nodded. "Yes. Thank you for your kindness." Bako grunted. "No kindness here, stranger. You eat. You work. That is the rule." Tund expected this. "I can work." Bako eyed him. "What can you do?" "I was a farmer," Tund said. "I know the land. I can plant. I can harvest." Bako shook his head. "The land here is just as dry as the bones of the dead. We do not farm." Tund hesitated. "Then what do you do?" Bako smirked. "We trade. We take what we need from the roads, from those who have more than us." Tund frowned. He had heard of villages like this, places where the strong took from the weak, where survival meant more than just hard work. Bako studied his expression. "You do not approve." "I only want to feed my family," Tund said carefully. Bako chuckled. "Then you will do as you are told." He motioned toward a group of men loading sacks onto donkeys. "You will go with them, prove yourself useful, and you can stay." Tund glanced back at the hut where Amina and the children still slept. He had no choice. The road to nowhere. By mid-morning, Tund and the man had left Ojidi, moving along a narrow dirt path that stretched into the wilderness. The men were armed with machetes and clubs, their faces unreadable. They walked in silence until one of the younger men, Deo, spoke. "Bako trusts you, but you are not one of us." "I am only here for my family," Tund replied. Deo smirked. "We all are." Tund felt unease creep into his chest. He had always been an honest man, working the land with his hands. But here, honesty had no value, only strength and cunning mattered. Hours passed before they reached their destination, a lonely stretch of road where traders and refugees traveled between villages. Bako raised a hand, signaling the men to stop. They crouched behind the tall grass, waiting. Tund's heart pounded. Then, in the distance, he saw them, a small caravan of travelers, their donkeys laden with sacks of grain and clay pots of water. Bako turned to him. "You want to stay in Ojidi?" Tund hesitated. "Then prove it." The travelers approached, unaware of the danger lurking in the grass. Tund's mind raced. If he refused, Bako would cast him and his family out. If he obeyed, he would become no better than the man who had destroyed everything he once believed in. He gripped the handle of the machete in his hands, his knuckles white. The travelers drew closer. Bako nodded. Tund took a breath and made his choice. The travelers were near now, their donkeys swaying under the weight of their burdens. They looked tired, their feet dragging through the dusty road, unaware of the danger that lurked in the tall grass. Tund's breath was heavy. Bako's eyes were on him, sharp and expectant. "You want to stay? Then prove yourself." Tund clenched his fists. He had done many things to survive, but this was different. The old man leading the caravan sighed and adjusted the cloth on his head. His gaze carried exhaustion but also resilience. These were people just like him, people struggling to survive. The signal came. Bako and his men sprang from their hiding places, blocking the traveler's path. The old man froze, gripping the donkey's reins. "Please," he said, his voice shaking. "We have nothing to give." Bako sneered. "Then why are your sacks full?" One of the men grabbed a bag from the donkey, tearing it open. Dried millet spilled onto the ground. Tun stood still, his heart pounding. Deo turned to him. "What are you waiting for? Take what you can." Tun's hands tightened into fists. Instead of reaching for the food, he shoved Deo aside and turned to the travelers. "Run!" he shouted. The old man hesitated, but then, seeing the chaos unfold, he grabbed his donkey's reins and sprinted. Baku's men lunged toward Tund. He dodged one and pushed another to the ground. A hard punch struck his ribs, but he didn't stop. He fought wildly, knocking one of them back before sprinting toward the road. Shouts rang behind him. He had no time to think. He had to reach his family. By the time Tun stumbled into Ojidi, his chest was burning, his legs barely holding him up. He didn't stop, he couldn't. He ran straight to their hut, where Amina was cradling Said. She saw his face and knew. "We have to leave," he gasped. She didn't ask why. She just grabbed Said, and Kahind pulled Rotimi up. The first shouts came from behind. Tun grabbed Amina's hand. "Go, now!" They ran, through the narrow paths of the village, past flickering fires and drying racks of fish. They ran past startled villagers, past empty fields, past everything they had known. Shouts of pursuit grew distant. They didn't stop running until their bodies collapsed beneath the shade of a baobab tree. Silence. Tund listened, his breath ragged. No footsteps, no voices. They were free. Tund didn't know how long he had been asleep. When he opened his eyes, morning had come. The sun peeked over the trees, casting golden light across the land. Amina was beside him, gently touching Said's forehead. "Her fever is breaking," she whispered. Relief surged through him. Kahin stirred, rubbing his tired eyes. Rotimi still slept beside his mother. And then, through the morning mist, Tun saw it. Beyond the trees, beyond the endless stretch of dry land, a river. A real river. His breath caught. Water. Life. Amina followed his gaze, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled. They had lost everything, yet they had found something greater. Tun turned to his family, his voice steady. "We start again." Hand in hand, they rose and walked toward the water, toward a new beginning.